Hey friends, it's Steven with Leviathan Snakes, and for this week's video, we're going to be talking about all of the different reasons why new breeders get out of breeding ball pythons, because I think that there are some commonalities across the board. So, we hope you guys enjoy the video. If you do, please like, comment, subscribe, and let's jump into it. When we first decided that we were going to try to breed ball pythons for a hobby, business, all of that kind of stuff, we kind of went a little wild and we were all over the place. We were buying just pretty much any animal that we thought looked good, and while we did have some kind of idea of what we wanted to make, we were not thinking of it in terms of projects. We weren't really thinking of it in terms of how many babies are they going to have, and there were a lot of mistakes that we made at the beginning that I think could contribute to somebody getting out of the hobby if they were to make them and they weren't careful and they didn't realize that they were making mistakes. So, the first reason why I think that people get out of the hobby before they have their first season completed is that they get so excited about the animals and they end up buying a clown, a pied, they end up buying 50 different animals that are all kind of mismatched, and they get them in a very, very short amount of time. And what I think that one danger of doing all of this is that when you go from taking care of one ball python to taking care of two, there's not that big of a difference, but when you, over the course of a couple months, go from one ball python to 50, it can be really, really overwhelming. So just the work that is required to care for that many different animals, especially if you're not used to doing it already, is a lot. And I think that that can burn people out before they even get to their first clutch. And that is one of the reasons why some people get out of the hobby. Tying into that reason, still before somebody has their first clutch, I think that one of the reasons why people get out of the hobby is they get so excited about it, and there's so many different amazing morphs that are out and just available right now that people think that they need to get a little bit of everything, or they see stuff where it's like you really need to focus on the high end to have a chance at success. And I think that sometimes people get in over their heads financially, where they end up going like really, really into debt just buying their animals and their startup equipment. And then what ends up happening is if you have maxed all of your credit cards, if you've spent all your savings, if you've tapped into your 401k just to get the animals that you need, and your animals are hatchlings and you're growing them up, and then an emergency happens. Maybe somebody loses their job. Maybe you get into a horrible car accident and you need money for medical bills or anything like this. What ends up happening in that situation is that you've already maxed out all of your different potential ways that you could have dealt with that emergency, and the only thing that you really have left that's like of value in this given situation are the snakes. So what ends up happening is that people who end up overextending themselves leave themselves vulnerable to when an emergency happens elsewhere in their life, and when that ends up happening, they often are forced to sell a lot of the animals that they're so excited about, and that just kind of kills their momentum and it kills the passion that they have for it, because they were so excited, but then life got in the way and all of these other emergencies came up and they don't want to go back because they kind of feel like a failure, even though it's not really any fault of their own besides just simply overextending themselves. So I think that that is reason number two that some people get out of the hobby before they even have their first clutch. Reason number three why I think that people get out of the hobby before they have their first clutch is that when you first get into the hobby, when you first get into breeding animals, when you first get into ball pythons, a lot of people are not experienced enough to know the proper way to go about building something like this. I'm not saying that we have anything that's super cool, but when you are getting 0 to 100 animals, it can introduce a lot of risks that you are not thinking about when you're brand new. And one of those is biosecurity. So as people are getting all of their initial animals and they are buying one animal from one breeder, another animal from a different breeder, and a third animal from a breeder that they found on Craigslist, what ends up happening is it's very, very likely that at some point, if they're not careful, they're going to end up buying an animal that has mites or has respiratory infections or some other disease that if they are not careful with how they introduce that animal to all of their others, they can infect all of the animals that they own. And if it's really bad, there are situations where like nidovirus has come in off of an animal that somebody has picked up, wiped out an entire collection. And if that ends up happening to somebody before they've even had their first season, oftentimes that is enough to make people be like, you know what, this isn't for me. I don't want to go through this. I don't want to go through the pain that is caused from having all of these different animals and then losing them. So that is another reason why some people get out before they even have their first clutch. I actually don't think that before people have their first clutch is when most people get out of the hobby if they're going to get out. I actually think that that comes later. And if you are looking at it from like you've had your first season, you've had hatchlings, I think that this is another one of those inflection points where some people get out of the hobby. And the reason why I think that it comes like right after somebody's had their first season is because all the way up until that point, breeders often study how to breed the animals. They do a bunch of research and they figure it all out. And if you've finished your first season, you've obviously done it successfully. So what I think happens after that first season is the breeders who haven't really focused on marketing their business, they haven't really focused on how do you sell ball pythons well and all of that stuff, how to structure a business for breeding ball pythons, I think that they start running into some of the harsh realities that selling ball pythons, at least in my opinion, is significantly harder to do than breeding ball pythons. And when they figure that out, and when they realize that, oh, I love these animals and I love breeding the animals, but I don't actually love selling them. I don't like dealing with the customers. It's really hard. I don't want to deal with people trying to offer less than what I think that my animals are worth. That might be one of the reasons why they end up deciding that breeding, at least at the scale of a business, isn't for them. And if that ends up happening, I think that it comes right around like shortly after the first season, once they kind of get into this idea of, oh, I like the animal aspect of it, but I don't like the business aspect of it. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But I do think that that is one reason why people decide that they don't want to breed after they've had their first season. Tying into that one, but maybe a little bit more negative. I think that there are some people who love the animals and there are some people who really like the business aspect of it, but that they don't have the skills to really excel at the business aspect of it, and for whatever reason, they are unwilling or unable to learn the skills that would make them successful. So I think that when it comes time to selling your ball pythons, there is a phrase that I feel like has been used fairly commonly that I don't necessarily agree with because I think it's too simplified, and that is, if you make a quality animal, that the animals will sell themselves. Or if you make a high-end animal, the animals will sell themselves. And I think that there is a nugget of truth in this. And the nugget of truth is kind of dealing with that if you are making something that nobody else has, that they would be, if anybody wants it, they're going to be forced to buy it from you, even if you don't have a big name. But the reason why I don't like this, and I think that why it can be harmful and why this idea can contribute to people getting out of the hobby, really around after their first season or so, is that it is really, really unlikely for a brand new breeder to make something that nobody else has and nobody else has made before, unless they are investing realistically like $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 plus into their animals. And most people who are getting into this do not have that kind of money, especially they don't have that kind of money up front right when they very first start. So I think that the idea of saying that if you make quality animals and the animals will sell themselves to new breeders, and this is no knock on new breeders because I still feel like that we are new breeders, but new breeders don't have the experience to really know what quality is. And the reason why I say this is that sometimes new breeders will look at an animal and see a single gene Inchi. And they see this single gene Inchi, and it's an amazing expression of Inchi. And they look at that, and you're like, that is the best quality Inchi that I have ever seen in my entire life. I'm gonna buy that, and if I breed that, I'm making quality ball pythons, and obviously the quality ball pythons will sell themselves. So anything that looks like that, it'll sell themselves. But that's not really how the ball python market works. And this is honestly, for good and bad, for whatever reason. I think that there could be some benefit to that, but really, the ball python market, people prefer to pick a gene that has a really, really good expression of it, but most of the time, people are picking the animals that fit into the projects that they are working. So if there is a single gene Inchi that looks absolutely incredible, and there is a Inchi double het clown pied, and somebody's working the clown pied project, even though the Inchi clown pied may not look as good as that absolutely perfect example of Inchi, the fact that it's already double het clown pied is probably going to make it more attractive to the person who's working the clown pied project. Because their idea is like, okay, in order for me to get that amazing example of Inchi into my clown pied project, I'm gonna have to breed them to, let's just say, a clown pied, and I'm gonna have to get those babies, and then I'll have an Inchi double het clown pied, and I'm gonna have to grow that one up, and it'll be like 5 to 6 years before you even have a shot to get that amazing example of Inchi in your project. And there's no guarantee that that amazing example of Inchi will actually be hereditary. It might just be completely random. And it looked really, really good, but it may not be the exact kind of Inchi replicatable in the offspring. So because of that, I think that it is pretty common that people who are brand new into the hobby view the saying of like, if you make quality animals, that the animals will sell themselves. Why that can be detrimental is because they aren't really thinking about like how the hobby works, especially when it moves into the higher end price points. Like, what are people actually looking for? When you are moving into the $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 price points, people are looking for stuff that fits into the exact projects that they are working, not trying to work multiple years to get one example of one incomplete dominant gene into their project just because that one looks a little bit better than what was already available. Why I think that this contributes to people getting out of the hobby is that when they approach it like that, the way that I said, where they focus on the quality of the individual morph without really in any regard to the projects that it fits into, they end up making animals that other people do not want to buy. And then because in their mind they have made quality animals and nobody wants to buy them, the market's dead and obviously nobody's buying any snakes, so therefore I'm going to get out because there's no money on ball pythons. So that is one thing that I think contributes to people getting out after they've had their first clutch, their first season really. A different thing that I think comes up after the first season kind of aspect, and it gets exacerbated, especially if they've had trouble selling animals or if there are various other factors that we've already talked about that are going on at the same time, and that is that somebody's life will change. Like over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, people's lives change. You get into relationships, you get out of relationships, you have children, you get new jobs, you lose jobs, things like that. And as their lives change, it can create situations where it makes it really, really hard to work a ball python breeding program because ball pythons need quite a bit of stability. You can simply move in the same town, just to a different house, and that move can throw off a season. And there are things that I think that happen around the year 1, year 2 mark that kind of just deal with life naturally changing that can contribute to people getting out of the hobby because their life has changed and they no longer have the time that they thought they were going to have to work with all of the animals that they really, really wanted to. This has nothing to do with passion, just sometimes life changes, and that is one of the reasons why people get out of the hobby around year 1, year 2. Going into the second season, I think that after the second season is a really, really tough spot for a lot of people who start their ball python breeding business. And the reason why is if you had trouble selling animals your first season, and then you've done a second season and you've bred more animals and you have more hatchlings and you still have animals left over from your first season, in your second season, if you are still having trouble selling those animals for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter why you're having trouble selling those animals, I think that this is another point where people are deciding like, okay, I have animals from last season, I have animals from this season, we're getting ready to go into our third season and we don't have room for them anymore. The amount of money that it takes to feed all of these animals is too much and it does not make sense to keep doing it. And I think that after the second season is probably the biggest kind of inflection point where a lot of people get out if they were not already experiencing at least a little bit of success or how they thought it was going to go. That does not mean that if somebody hasn't made a profit after the second season, they're going to get out, but I think that has to deal with more of the mindset. So if they're having trouble selling after the second season, I think that is a sign that their animals or their approach to the business is somehow flawed. So I think at that point, the second kind of stage is sometimes people just get out right there. It's like, oh, the ball python market is dead. Nobody wants them. I had trouble selling them last year. I have trouble selling them this year. There's no reason to breed more animals and have trouble selling them again next year. The ball python market is dead. I'm just going to go ahead and get out. I think that that's kind of the mindset of it. But moving on from that, some people realize that it isn't necessarily the market. Some people realize that they had made mistakes when they were building out their ball python breeding program. They bought animals that didn't really work together, or they bought projects that don't really have a very strong demand, or lots of different things like that, and that they realize that after the second season, that if they are going to have the success, if they're going to have the chance to make it into a full-time business like they want to, they are going to massively need to retool all of their stuff. And I think that when that comes up, it can be really scary for people, because the idea is that they have already invested thousands upon thousands of dollars, and after 2 to 3 years, they realize that they did it wrong, and in order for them to have a chance at doing it right, they are going to need to do all of the work to sell the excess animals that they don't really need anymore, that don't really fit into their vision, and that is a lot of work. So that's one thing. That's really hard on its own. And then the kicker to that is that they're going to take the money from it and not necessarily try to use it to mitigate their losses, that they're going to take that money, reinvest it into new animals, and they're probably going to have to invest more money from their personal life, whether it's from their job or something like that, in order to get the animals that they believe will really help them out. And that's really scary, because ultimately it might take another 2 to 3 years before they realize that they did it wrong again. And I think that the people who get that situation going on where they realize, like, okay, this is going to take a major revamp for me to even have a shot to make this into a full-time business, I think that they can get scared, and at that point they're like, okay, I know that I did it wrong, and it's not necessarily that the market is dead, but I don't know if I can do it, so I'm going to get out in this specific situation. So I think that that's one of the reasons why people get out around year 2 to 3-ish. Now, if they end up retooling, if they end up restructuring, I think that after 2 to 3 years of breeding and understanding how the industry works, I think that often people have a way better shot of actually succeeding, because they know that they shouldn't just get 100 animals that don't really work together. They often will cut back, and they will focus on the stuff that they are personally really, really passionate about, because in this situation, if they kind of survive that kind of like 3-year mark, what ends up often happening is that they look at it as they love the animals, they love specific projects so much that it does not even matter if nobody else buys them. They want to work that project for personal fulfillment. And if they do it from personal fulfillment, not without the idea of like trying to chase a profit or make it into a full-time business, I think that that is the situation where people have the best opportunity of actually making money in this, because they don't get focused on whether or not they're selling their animals quick enough. They don't get focused on the idea of the prices have fallen so much it's not even worth it to breed it. Instead, what they're doing is they're focused on making the amazing combo that they've been wanting to for years and years and years and years, and when they finally hit it, they're going to have other animals that are part of that project, but not exactly what they wanted. And if that combination was just as amazing as they truly believed it was, and they're able to show the world that it is, there are going to be other people who want those byproducts, because they also want to work that project. And I think that that really comes in after the year 3, after the year 4, after the year 5 mark. So realistically, all of this to say is there are lots of different reasons, and a lot of it has to do with stability, with overextending yourself, with just not being able to scale properly. But if people are able to make that kind of transition from I'm doing this because I want to make this into a full-time business to I'm doing this because I just love it, and even if I didn't make very much money on it at all, I just want to do it for fun, I think that that is the best shot that they have of actually turning this into something really, really cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you next week.